This time, let us talk about the other sampling techniques. The third of the probability sampling techniques is stratified random sampling. The population is subdivided into at least two different subpopulations or strata, singular stratum, that shares the same characteristics such as gender, then draw a sample from each stratum. So, in this probability sampling, we shall first subdivide the population into different groups, at least two different subpopulations, and we call each subpopulation a stratum, plural strata, like what was mentioned a while ago. And then, that's the time that we will draw a sample from each stratum and combine them to form the entire sample for our study. That population with the size of n shall be subdivided with different number of units each, depending on the characteristic. And from each of these, we will take a sample size that might be different and make sure that it is randomly taken either through SRS or systematic. To further illustrate this, let's have this example. As you can see, we have stratum 1 here, stratum 2, and stratum 3. In stratum 1, we have 3 members. So n sub 1 will be 3 members. Stratum 2, we have 6 members. So n sub 2 will be 6. And n sub 3 will also has 3 members, making a total of our population size 12. Here, we have a sample size of 4. And what happened here is that we want to make sure that each stratum is represented equally. And when we say equally, we don't have much of a choice but to represent stratum 2 more because it has more members than the other strata. How do we now select the number? First, let's take the proportion of each stratum size to the population size. When we say take the proportion, that is saying what is the percentage or the proportion of 3 out of 12, then 6 out of 12, and 3 out of 12 as well. As we all know, 3 out of 12 is 25%, 6 out of 12 is 50%, and 3 out of 12 is another 25%. Therefore, if we take these values to the sample, this means that we have to take the 25% of 4 so that we can take that number in stratum 1, and 25% of 4 is 1. Similarly, we have to take the 50% of 4 so that we can take it from stratum 2, and that is 2. That's why we have 1 here from stratum 1 and 2 for stratum 2. And similarly, 25% of 4 for stratum 3, which is also 1. That's why we only have 1 from stratum 3. And that's how we form stratified random sampling, because we take the percentages or the proportion for each stratum that will fit in our sample. The next probability sampling that we have is cluster sampling. Here, we divide the population area into sections or clusters, then randomly select a few of those sections, and then you randomly select a sample from those selected sections. Just like here, if the 48 states of the US is divided into this area, maybe it's better if we label them. This can be the first area, the second area, the third, the fourth, and the fifth area. In cluster sampling, we shall select randomly from 1 to 5 and then take all that are those in those specific areas. So if we randomly select, probably based on lottery method, 2 and 5, therefore everyone in this area and everyone in that area are part of our sample. The n population units are divided into different clusters this time, and a random sample of clusters is taken, not just from each We will not take a sample rather from each cluster, but we will take an entire cluster, a random sample of clusters, either through SRS or systematic sampling. Like this one, we subdivided our population into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 clusters. And based on our sample, we shall only take 2 clusters as our sample, and we have randomly selected cluster 3 and cluster 6. Hence, all members of cluster 3 and all members of cluster 6 are part of the sample. So, to clearly differentiate, when we do stratified random sampling, all groups, we take a sample from all groups, but we only take some units per group. However, in cluster, we take at least one group, not all, but only at least one, and all units per the selected group. In the next video, we're going to talk about the other sampling techniques, this time the non-probability sampling techniques.